The investment we've made these past 3 years have the power to transform this country for the next 5 decades. We've got a fight in our hands. And my question to you is simple. Are you with me in this fight?
He's ready to finish the job. He's ready to win. And with your help, he will.
And welcome back to America Decides. President Biden's reelection campaign is kicking into high gear as he rallied with union workers in Philadelphia over the weekend. And this afternoon, Biden is speaking in East Palo Alto, California, where he announced over $600 million in climate investments to help fight climate change.
We're investing in the people and places that have been hit the hardest, but who are also on the front lines of leading us forward. Throughout our history, we're the only nation in the world that has come out of every crisis we've entered stronger than we went into it. We're doing it again here on the climate crisis.
And CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes, who is traveling with the president, joins us now from San Francisco. Hey, Nancy, good to see you over on the West Coast. So President Biden's fundraising in California today as well, in addition to that speech that we just heard. Can you walk us through what he has on his schedule? How big of an appearance is this?
Sure. He's really doing a lot of fundraising here with a side order of public appearances. Really, at this stage in the campaign, what's most important for the Biden campaign is raising a lot of money and raising it fast. So he's got a couple of fundraisers in Silicon Valley today, a couple more here in the San Francisco area tomorrow. These are being hosted by big tech-heavy hitters, executives from Microsoft, the co-founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, those types of bold-faced names. And then he's also going to be giving a speech here in San Francisco before heading back to Washington, D.C. This is all part of a big push in the second half of June, where you've got not just the president, but also the vice president, the second gentleman, and the first lady all traveling the country, holding major fundraisers where they can bring in a couple million at a pop over the second half of June. Because he doesn't have any major Democratic opponents. So really right now, the campaign believes that his time is best spent not going out and holding big rallies, but going around hat in hand asking for money.
A lot of money to be had in California, especially. Speaking of the campaign, how is the Biden campaign feeling at this point? We had a CBS News poll earlier this month that this number kind of stood out to me, that 42% of Democrats don't think the president should be running for re-election. 58% say that he should be running, but that 42% is still a sizable chunk. Is this something that the campaign is concerned about? And kind of how are they feeling about that at this stage?
So they sort of write that off at this stage as Democratic angst, and they argue this is the kind of thing that Democratic voters are famous for. What about this? What about that? We're not sure he's the right person. They argue at the end of the day, these voters are all going to coalesce around Biden because he will be the nominee for re-election. And they point to his bid a couple of years ago, the first time around, and note that there were Democratic voters who were interested in all these various candidates. Once he became the nominee, the party rallied around him. And they argue it's not unusual this far out from Election Day for voters to be sort of, hopeful that perhaps there might be somebody younger, somebody fresher, somebody different. But they believe at the end of the day, those voters will come home and support him.
Democratic angst is something we hear a lot about in this lead up. I'm curious, too, kind of how Biden and his team have been responding to what should be something that would be, a huge moment, obviously, in the campaign, which is the indictment of your chief rival, Donald Trump. I know the
Right.
First Lady and Biden campaigned in Philadelphia over the weekend, and they offered some criticisms of the Republican field. But how is Biden kind of addressing this issue specifically?
He's really not addressing it head on. He has made an oblique joke or two, sort of referencing the indictment in not so many words, sort of showing that he's kind of, he's in the know, but he doesn't want to talk about it. In fact, he tries not to say Donald Trump's name at all. He did a rally in Philadelphia. You played a clip of it this weekend, and he was speaking to union members, and he said, my predecessor. He didn't say Donald Trump, and he didn't talk about the indictment. He talked about infrastructure, which is an issue that that crowd and people all over the country care about a lot. And he said under his predecessor, infrastructure was a punchline, and he is going to make it a 10-year headline because of all the infrastructure spending that he has gotten passed. So he's, at this point, really looking to create that kind of contrast, to say that Donald Trump wasn't able to get things done and that he has gotten them done, more so than going after Trump's indictments or his legal woes, which really gets him sort of down in the dirt with Trump, which is something that he doesn't want to do, at least not right now.
Yeah, and to that point, Nancy, I mean, when you talk to Democrats in the White House and the campaign, do they still assume that Donald Trump will be their opponent in the fall, or are they starting to kind of take a look at some of these other candidates?
Look, I think they have to prepare for the possibility that some dark horse will emerge. You always have to worry about that, but certainly they look at the same polls we do, and they see the unbelievably commanding lead that Donald Trump has in those polls right now. And so you have to assume, as they are, that he is the odds-on favorite in the Republican Party. Now, will Republicans suddenly get skittish because of the 2 indictments he's already facing and more possibly to come? Sure. So they are drawing up plans to take on any number of Republicans, but the biggest playbook that they've got right now does have to do with Donald Trump, because he is just leading his closest rivals by 20, 30, 40 points. And so at this point, yes, he does look like he is in a commanding lead in the Republican field.
And speaking of former presidents, former President Obama has kind of been starting to put himself out there and weigh in on the Republican field a little bit. He's clashed with presidential candidates like Tim Scott, who's kind of used it, honestly, as a badge of honor, and Nikki Haley a little bit. Do we have any idea of kind of what role he is planning to play in 2024? Is this kind of more of what we might see?
Well, this is interesting because he's certainly lobbing some criticism that the current president probably couldn't. He was doing a podcast with one of his former senior advisors, David Axelrod, and he criticized Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, 2 notably minority candidates who are running for president in the Republican Party. And he said that while their messages about race in America are hopeful, that there is a history of minority candidates in the Republican Party kind of glossing over, in his words, the history of racial injustice in this country. And he said that they're not addressing crippling generational poverty resulting from hundreds of years of racism. And so this was very interesting to have the nation's first Black president making this case about a couple of minority candidates. And as you would imagine, both Tim Scott and Nikki Haley responded. Scott said that he's actually an example of progress for African Americans, and Nikki Haley argued that former President Obama was turning minorities into victims. So an interesting conversation taking place there, and a sign that the former president isn't going to shy away from making pointed criticisms from the sidelines in this campaign.
Yeah, and an opportunity for those candidates also to fundraise off of those comments. So we'll see kind of how that all plays out. Much more to come. Nancy Cordes in California, thank you so much, as always.
You're welcome.